Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be made available for viewing through our Council's website. Remote participants, please follow the good practice guidance, which we should all be aware of by now. Muting microphones and switching off your video when you're not addressing the meeting. Writing, speak in the Teams chat function when you want to contribute. If you're in the hall, which is basically just me, so I don't think this bit really counts, you can do this on your iPhone or iPad. Please don't repeat contributions already made by other members. No material should be posted in the chat function that is intended as part of the discussion. The usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period and write leave in the chat function, and then join when you rejoin the meeting so that we can keep track on whether the meeting is co-writ. All members should speak clearly and directly into the microphone when making contributions, and when referring to reports, please provide reference to the relevant page and paragraph to allow everyone to follow. Please focus contributions on areas where clarification is required or to propose an alternative to a recommendation. We have several important reports to consider today, and I hope we will deal with the business in our usual efficient manner. Claire, can you provide the sederant and any apologies, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. We've got apologies this morning from Councillor McGregor. Currently, we've got 3 members not present, being Councillors Dorber, Giusti and Mail. As you've already indicated, Chair, all the other members are attending via Teams. Thank you.
I approve members' remote participation. Do we have any declarations of interest? Nope, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Can we approve the minutes of the meeting held on 29th of November 2022? Councillor Beretti with a thumbs up. Is there anyone else to second that?
Happy to second, Chair.
Right, thanks Archie. Archie Driver. So we move on to the first report, which is the review of council-wide risk, financial sustainability and budget management. Report by Head of Governance and Assurance. Lindsay Wilson, Lorna Campbell, Karen Donaldson and Richard Fox are here to assist if members have any questions. And I think we have a report to go through, so if we can...
The first one's just to agree the presentation.
Aye, so we've got the first recommendation of us is to agree to receive the report, so we're happy to do that. Half assuming so. Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and morning, members. Understanding for this part of the item, there's a presentation which I'll provide, so if somebody could just maybe pull that up for me, please. Thank you. So this is part of the wider review of council-wide risks, and what I'll try and do this morning is just focus on specifically the financial sustainability and budget management risk, just to explain the nature of that risk, the potential consequences associated with that risk, but also importantly to just talk a wee bit about some of the measures that the council has in place to seek to manage and mitigate against the impacts of that potential risk. So starting off, why is it a strategic risk? I mean, I think this is quite a good time, or certainly topical time, to discuss this one, because I think to a greater or lesser extent, the financial sustainability of all our public services are at risk to some extent at present because of the extent of the financial challenge that is currently being faced. Obviously, public services, including the council, depend on the availability and effective management of financial resources in order to support the delivery of their services. This council spends about £420 million per annum in revenue spending, plus another £30 to £50 million on average in capital spending to support a very wide range of public services, including obviously education, social care, support for our infrastructure like our roads, and also to support a wide range of community facilities. So obviously the availability on a sustainable basis of resources to deliver that is absolutely key to the way that we operate. There is a number of things that could impact on the availability of those resources, and some of the key things that we need to try and ensure to try and address those risks is that we have a genuinely balanced budget. And what I mean by genuinely balanced budget is one that's balanced on a recurring basis, so there's not an over-reliance on non-recurring resources to balance the books in any one financial year, because that obviously presents a risk beyond the immediate term, and that's something this Council's been very strong on through members' decisions over an extended period. Potential budget overspending, significant unanticipated expenditure. Obviously those are kind of things that where if there's any spending or loss that the Council hadn't planned on, that would divert resources away from planned activities and presents a risk both to our finances and to our service delivery. So again, these are the key things that we need to try and manage against. And also an important factor is financial resilience, and a lack of financial resilience would obviously increase the risk of anything unanticipated impacting directly on our services. If we don't have things like our general fund balances or appropriate provision within our budgets to address unanticipated factors, then that would have a direct impact in the immediate term on our services if anything did go wrong. So the fact that the Council has in place key financial management mechanisms such as the retention of general fund balances, provision in budgets, specific resources for other issues such as severe weather, that's a key element of protecting our services and maintaining our financial resilience beyond the immediate term. If I just move on to the possible consequences, adverse impact on the Council's ability to progress our agreed priorities or objectives and deliver our services. I mean, the first 3 points there are really the same point but on different parts of our service areas. And any impact or risk to our financial sustainability, to the availability of resources to support our services, means that there's less money to deliver our services, and that means that there's likely to be a reduction in the level and quality service that the Council is able to provide. I think probably one of the key issues that impacted on financial sustainability for all public services recently, a good example, is the COVID pandemic. The early stages, well, coming later on into COVID, it became apparent that most of the financial impact on councils was going to be addressed through additional monies through the UK and Scottish governments. But in the very early stages of COVID, that was characterised by councils having to take immediate emergency action and incur significant additional expenditure to provide the services that were required during that period. There was also a reduction in the level of income being generated by councils, and that was before it was apparent that additional money was going to come through. So one of the things that allowed the council to focus on providing the support and to maintain services during that period was our general financial sustainability. The fact that we came into that financial year with a genuinely balanced budget, the fact that we had set aside general fund balances and other non-recurring resources, and the fact that we had allowance in our budgets for budget pressures meant that at least for a short spell we had that resilience there that allowed us to focus on service delivery. And it was almost like we'll worry about how the money comes after that. Obviously I was worried right away, but in terms of how the council operated, it was very much about we need to deliver the services and then we'll address the financial impacts. And that was different. It was uncomfortable because usually councils approve spending and then incur it, but councils were in an emergency situation at that time. But we had the degree of financial resilience that allowed us to manage during that period. Moving past COVID, I think we're probably now in a similarly kind of almost emergency, I don't want to use too kind of strong a word, but a really, really challenging period because of the impact of inflation and the cost of living crisis, and the fact that that is having a huge impact on the cost of our services, whether that's through pay increases, whether that's through increases in our energy costs, our food costs, our fuel costs. It's having an impact right across the board. And obviously there's an increasing gap between the extent to which government funding is supporting that and the level of costs that councils are currently incurring. So that is, I probably see that as a more significant risk to our financial sustainability, because COVID to some extent was always going to be temporary in nature. It was a fair bit more prolonged, I think, as initially anticipated, but it was always a case of we need to get through this period and then get back to a degree of normality. With the gap between the cost of service delivery and the availability of government funding at the minute, it's difficult to see how, even though things may settle down in terms of inflation beyond the next year or so, it's not as if costs are going to fall back at that stage. They might go up at a lower extent, and there is a hope that energy costs may come down to some extent, but to a large extent those increased costs will be in the system on a sustained basis. And I think it is unlikely that funding from government to support that, and we are largely dependent on government funding to support our services, that will be able to keep pace to any real extent with those increased costs. And I think that's particularly a concern for local government. We know that the percentage or proportion of the Scottish Government's annual resources that are directed to support local government is reducing year on year. So although this is a pressure across public services as a whole, it's a particular pressure for Scottish councils because of that issue in terms of how the Scottish Government allocates its budget. The bottom point on that slide, reduced ability to provide an effective response to significant issues such as impact of severe weather or pandemics. If you don't have financial resilience, that means that your ability to respond to these type of emergencies is much restricted, or when you do have to respond, it has a wider impact on the delivery of your normal day-to-day services. So again, that's one of the main reasons why the maintenance of financial resilience is really important to the Council in terms of its ongoing activities. Just move on to some of the things that we currently have in place to support the maintenance of financial resilience and to try and manage against this particular risk. One is the development of medium-term financial strategy. I think one of the things I think this Council has always looked towards is not just the upcoming financial year. It would be easy, maybe not easy, but it would be easier to set a one-year budget if we were comfortable that relying on non-recurring resources to get us through, to live beyond our means for a short spell and worry about the impact of that later on was something that we did. But generally, when we are setting our budgets, we look at the short term, the medium term and the longer term and trying to maintain financial resilience across that period. One of the challenges to that, particularly in recent years, is that since 2015-16, the Scottish Government's annual budget announcement has only covered one financial year. It used to be for 3 financial years, but that hasn't been the case since 2015-16. So that does make medium-term financial planning that bit more difficult. But I think it is something the Council needs to try and maintain, because if you don't look beyond the immediate term, that's when you get into some of the more significant difficulties regarding financial resilience, and that's something we're taking into account, obviously, as we're developing our budget process at the minute. The agreed budget setting process that members agree and the budget principles that go along with that are key to supporting our financial sustainability. Obviously, we set the budget on an annual basis alongside the council tax. Council tax levels are set on a basis that takes into account both service requirements and the potential impact on our council taxpayers. So there's that balanced consideration there. The other key budget setting principles, we do look to set our budget on a genuinely balanced basis, on a recurring basis rather than an excessive reliance on non-recurring resources. Another thing is that we try to ensure that our capital investment levels and the external debt that goes along with that are based on a prudent and affordable assessment of what the council can actually deliver over the period, so that we don't incur levels of debt that result in us having significant loan charges in future that we struggle to service. I think the retention of general fund balances, which the members have always been very strong on in this council, is important to give us that financial sustainability. Also, members have taken the opportunity in recent years where we've had the opportunity to set aside monies for budget pressures and to give us a bit of additional resilience, and that's been particularly valuable this year because that's been one of the sources we've used to deal with the excess inflationary costs that we've seen in the current year. When we set the budget in February, That was obviously before the war in Eastern Europe, and obviously inflation and the impact, particularly in energy costs, was well in excess of what we'd anticipated when we set the budget. Obviously that's subsequently knocked into increased pay increases as well. So the fact that we've had that Budget Pressures Resilience Fund there has been a key tool that's allowed the Council to deal with that without having to look at balancing reductions, at least in the short term, in terms of existing budget plans. Also, as a kind of fallback, the Council does have an insurance programme. It's comprehensive in the extent of the risks and the services it covers, but there is also a degree of self-insurance in there to make sure that we can effectively balance and manage the cost of insurance premiums. But that insurance programme and our current arrangements provide that kind of extra assurance that if something big happens, it's something that's beyond the levels that we have allowed for, that we do have insurance arrangements in place that would help us to address that. Just continuing on the existing controls, I think probably it's important to recognise that there is issues that do happen. There is things that impact on our financial resilience and on our overall financial well-being. Things like service overspending. A number of years ago we had issues with social work. Probably more recently, the most high-profile issue has been the contract loss in relation to the Trunk Roads operation. So I think that really highlights the importance of effective financial regulations, financial management arrangements and supporting procedures. This, I think, has been reinforced through the Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee's review of those financial procedures and procurement standing orders that was undertaken. And one of the things that we're looking at the minute is we're updating our financial regulations and supporting codes to bring to members for their consideration and approval before the start of the new financial year. We also have regular financial monitoring reports that are presented both to the Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee and to individual service committees, which allow members, one, to be aware of the key issues regarding financial management and monitoring within services, but also give members the opportunity to scrutinise and question some of those activities as well. Agreed Treasury Management Strategy is a fundamental part of maintaining our financial resilience. We have things like strict counterparty limits agreed by members, which restrict the extent to which we can place our funds with any one organisation to make sure there's that minimisation of risk. We have also specific limits on the extent to which we can expose ourselves to movements in interest rates. And again, that's been really helpful of late because the increase in rates has not affected us to any real extent to date because we are largely, we've borrowed on a fixed rate basis, so we haven't been impacted by those short-term increases in interest rate levels. And also we have restrictions on the total level of external borrowing that we can undertake to protect the Council over the longer term as well. Budget holder training and support is a key element of this, and obviously that links into a subsequent report on today's agenda. And also the external and internal audit processes give us that kind of independent assurance on the effectiveness of our financial management arrangements. As I would stress that we do have a lot of measures in place to support the Council's financial sustainability, but also recognise that from time to time, things do go wrong, that there needs to be an ongoing focus on maintaining and further developing and improving our financial management arrangements to support the Council's financial sustainability. So really just to finish off in terms of planned actions, I think the progression of the recently agreed budget development and change process is one. I think I've probably talked a wee bit this morning about things we've had in place and still have in place that have protected our financial resilience to date. I think it's important to recognise that it's an increasing challenge at the minute. I think all Scottish councils are likely to be in a position next year where there may well be a gap between what they're spending and what we're spending, and the level of funding that we're receiving to support that. So I think Scottish councils as a whole will be operating on a bit of a deficit budget and requiring to use non-recurring resources to get us through that period. And this is largely because of that gap between the impact of inflation and the extent to which funding is keeping up with that. A key part of this is that the Scottish Government will announce its budget this Thursday, and that will be how much they will allocate to their different portfolios, including councils. The resource spending review that was announced in May this year indicated that that was likely to be cash flat. So that basically would mean nothing for pay, nothing for non-pay inflation, nothing for pressures. Obviously, the extent to which inflation has gone up over the last 18 months or so makes that an extremely challenging position for councils. So there is a hope that might be at least partially addressed this week, but I think it's, to be fair, there's still likely to be a very significant gap between what we are spending on our existing services and the level of funding we'll have available to us going forward. So I think it's important that we do take forward through our budget process a change programme and a change process to identify some of the things we'll have to do to live within our means beyond the immediate term. I think the fact that we've got non-recurring resources and balances available to us will help buy us time and will help us take a more strategic and measured approach to that. But we've got to use that period to make the changes and make the spending cuts that we need to make to balance the books on a recurring basis. So that work will be progressed through the cross-party budget panel, Finance Procurement and Transformation Committee, and also ultimately through full council. So that's really probably all I'd want to say in introduction, Chair. As I say, this is very much an ongoing activity, a key focus for the Finance Procurement Service and for the wider council. But happy to answer any questions that members have got on that.
Thank you, Paul. That was quite a comprehensive summary there. I think it has been, you know, it's not good fortune. It's the fact that we've planned to keep our reserves as set us in good stead. And I do think that going forward, I find it surprising, and it's not really new to me because I only got elected in 2017. The fact that you're having to try and come up with a medium-term plan, but only getting a year indication of the funding you're going to have is quite a challenge to be had. So, but thanks for very much, and also delivered in your usual reassuring manner, Paul. Thank you. So, questions, Katie Hagman.
Thank you, Councillor. I think I don't know whether I should really be giving a declaration of interest being the resources spokesperson for COSLA, but we're not talking about the specifics. But so I will note that, but I don't think it's a conflict that means I can't have input in this item. I think your comments there, Chair, of where it's not just good fortune. I think credit to Paul and his team for getting us into this position. Certainly within my role within the FPT in the last council term. I think we have managed our finances particularly well, and I think that needs to be acknowledged, and the team need to know that acknowledgement is there. So if that can be passed back, I think it's really important. It is a really, really challenging time. I mean, nobody's in any doubt of this one. But I'm just a bit interested, and maybe, Paul, you can maybe enlighten me slightly. I'm not involved on the budget panel, and we're looking at the financial sustainability and the budget management, but there's nothing in there about income generation. And I appreciate that we may not have a huge amount of scope available to us, but at this point in time, I believe we should be looking at every way possible for income generation, whether that's our own energy or taking advantage of potentially some of the new legislation coming forward. So is there a piece of work being done by the council to maximise what income generation we can do as a local authority? Thank you.
Paul, you want to come back?
Yeah, no, that's a helpful question. I've only really touched just at the end of the discussion there on the change programme that the council is progressing at the minute, and that was subject to discussion at the budget panel last week. And the key element of that change programme will be looking at opportunities for the council to increase income generation over the upcoming period. Energy is a good example of that, and I know that's been looked at both locally and on a national basis in terms of what councils can do to, whether it's generate their own income, generate their own energy, and any other opportunities that councils can take to minimise the extent to which reductions in funding will impact on service delivery through replacing that to some extent with increased income is what all councils are looking at the minute. So we're doing some specific pieces of work locally at the minute on that. As I say, it was briefly discussed at the budget panel last week. But also, I think there's a recognition, given the extent of the challenge that councils are facing at the minute, that there's a need for us as all councils across Scotland to work closely and jointly together to progress some of these opportunities, because we're facing similar issues and we should have similar opportunities as well. So income generation is something that I know Solace have got high on their agenda as well. So it's something that councils are committed to maximising going forward. But just a wee word of caution in that, in terms of the ability that we've got to generate income to try and address the extent of the challenge at the minute is fairly limited. So it'll be part of the tools that we need to make, but I wouldn't want to kind of raise expectations to too great extent that it'll make a huge contribution in the short or medium terms in that respect.
Thank you, Paul. Katie, do you want to come back?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I mean, I'm looking at the actual sort of current risk matrix, and we've only sort of got one on there, and I think this is quite a detailed landscape. And I'm wondering, is there more detailed risk matrix or whatever that we're looking at? Because obviously there's a huge amount of different issues, and if we can mitigate some of these as individual, it might be more useful for members to see the current snapshot of where we are. But no, I appreciate the response there from Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dryborough, do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks very much, Stuart. I'm just on the last point there. A lot of this information is a lot of work that APSI has done over the last number of years on the Local Government Commission 2030 local by default. And, as Paul says, some of the risk, of course, is what is the budget going to be for the next 2 or 3 years, and we don't know what that actually is. And we're basically at a standstill, and with the cost of inflation, I go back a step or two with regards finances and things like that. So I'm just wondering, Paul, if you've had the opportunity to read the Local Government Commission 2030 for APSI local by default, which has a lot of the things that you've said. For instance, we are looking by 2030 to have, as part of GDP, a funding settlement for local authorities that doesn't go below that amount. So therefore, we can plan longer in terms of time. So you're looking 10, 15 years rather as the 1 year that we have to plan at the moment. So I'm just wondering, Paul, if you have had a chance to look at it. If not, I'm quite happy to put the link to that on the page here. And if you have had a look at it, COSLA agrees with it as well, by the way, so I'm pleased to say that. It's one of those things where I think we need to start lobbying for better budgets for local authorities.
Paul, you want to come in?
Yep. To be honest, I'm not I'm aware of the APSI document that Archie is referring to, but I wouldn't say that I've got the detail on it. But I think from what he's saying there, that there's a fair degree of consistency with work that we're doing at the minute through COSLA in relation to what's called the fiscal framework for local government, and that's really aimed at getting a more balanced and effective relationship between Scottish local government and the Scottish government. And some of the key asks that we've got in that are a return to medium-term planning, so that we get our budgets beyond the 1 year basis and at least the 3 year basis, that there's clarity on the share of funding that is being passed to local government in terms of the Scottish overall budget. The current indications are that in the last few years, the share of the Scottish Government budget that comes to councils has gone from 34% to 28%. So that's a kind of continual deprioritisation of local government for other purposes, and that's particularly that's something that governments can do. But it's important to make sure there's visibility on that, and also to ensure that when councils are asked to deliver additional policies, that comes with the appropriate level of funding to support it as well. So there's a whole range of issues that we are working with government on at the minute through that fiscal framework to try and address some of the things that Archie was talking about there to support councils in their financial planning and ensuring their sustainability going forward.
Thank you, Paul. And Archie, I'd be quite pleased to get a link to the document you're referring to as well. Is there anything you want to add?
No, I think it's quite clear, Chair, that all local authorities, all organisations that support local authorities are looking at this in the wider agenda, and I'm quite happy to put the link into the chat line once I get it. Once I can find a way of doing this, because I'm on my iPad at the moment, and I'll try and do it on my laptop. Cheers.
Thank you. As I don't see any other questions, I've just out of curiosity, where we've got a flat cash potential settlement. It may or may not be the settlement, but one thing that, and I said maybe a wee bit of a nerdy question yet again, is have you actually worked out what our inflation rate is? I know we get a consumer prices index and it reflects a basket and whatever, but have any indication of the effect inflation is having on our budget?
Yes, what we've been doing through the Finance Procurement and Transformation Committee is actually highlighting that although the overall level, the CPI, which is the kind of headline figure that you see in the news, is inflation across the country, what's far more important for the council is how much it's impacting on our costs. So pay is our biggest element of costs, and obviously we've had the SGC pay deal which reported to committee and the impact of that, but the teachers' negotiations are ongoing at the minute. But also we put a kind of detailed report to the last meeting of the FPT committee which showed the impact of increases on the various commodities and products that the council buys. So if you take, for example, our energy bills, our gas bill has gone up by 166% from last year to this year. And that, I think that's, I've got it written down actually because I thought that might be asked. I think it's gone from 1 million, our gas bill's gone from 1 million to 2.7 million in the last year. And the electricity, it's a lower percentage increase, I think it's about 24%. But because we spend more on electricity than gas, the impact of that's been substantial as well. So there's a report that we put to the FPT committee which talked about the percentages in each of the different commodities and categories that we face, and reflected that against the provision that we had in budgets to address the impact of inflation. So it's been an exceptional year for inflation. We knew in February that inflation was on the way up, and the council agreed to put additional resources into the budget to accommodate that. But because of developments post-February, it's gone well beyond what was anticipated. So as I say, we've been reporting that to the FPT committee, so members get that kind of overall understanding of the impact on the council.
Yeah, I got an index, as an average over the whole piece.
It's a fair point. I would say it's probably slightly below the CPI level at the minute, partly because through the national contracts we've been protected from the worst of the energy increases. I'm a wee bit concerned about the extent to which they may go up next year to catch up with that to an extent, but I think because of that and because the CPI has been so impacted by energy, I think we're a wee bit below that. I think we'd probably be in the region of the kind of 67% overall, 62, sorry, rather than 67% overall in terms of inflation. I can probably do a wee bit of further work to put that across all of our budgets and come up with a figure there and get back to you on that, but I think we'll be slightly below the CPI level at present.
One of the reasons I'm asking as well is it's actually, in my own work, it's a thing that I've actually went through that exercise, and it is quite useful because equally there are some things that went down. But it's a moving target. But if there's no further questions, but I don't think there are, we'll move to the recommendations. We've already 2.1. We've already agreed and had the presentation. 2.2, note the existing measures in place and planned actions to manage the Council's financial sustainability and budget management risk as detailed in Appendix 2 and consider whether these are sufficient. And 2.3, consider the implications of the financial sustainability and budget management risk on Council services. Now, all happy with that? So then we'll move on to the next item. Internal audit reports, item 5, issued report by Head of Governance and Assurance. Richard Fox is here to assist if members have any questions. I will open the meeting to member debate. Has anyone got any questions on this report? That all seems quite quiet. We're quite happy with this report. We've been through the main financial systems report before, so I think so. We're happy to note, and we have no further comment. Oh, Councillor Driver.
Thanks, your apologies. It was hard to get my hand up there. It's just on page 26 at the council tax and non-domestic rates when we talk about reconciliations. And we did not review the NDR year-end reconciliation part of this audit. I do get some issues from constituents when they have, for instance, got a letter saying that they owe so much on their council tax. They've paid it off, yet the communication between the council and the council, the reconciliation services, has not been good. So I'm just wondering if there's anything we can do about that, because there are cases when council tax is owed by council the constituents and they've not paid it, and quite rightly they go through that process. But when people pay off, it takes a long time for them to understand to get feedback saying it's now been cleared. So I'm just wondering if there's something we can do there.
Richard, want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually wondering whether this is more a subject of the council tax audit rather than the accounting audit. And I'm just wondering whether Lorna Campbell might be on the call for the next item on the agenda and might be able to answer for us.
No, thank you. Yep. Lorna, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Yes. Maybe just to clarify, Councillor Drysborough, are we talking about the interface between the sheriff officers and council tax payments? Is that what you're referring to?
It's the debt collection agency. I can't. It's Stirling. Yeah. Stirling something.
Stirling Park. Yes. What normally happens is where payments are made to the collection agent, the sheriff officer, we do have an interface with them that they will notify us when the monies are collected, and we record that in that record. Now that is a weekly interface, so there shouldn't be a large delay. So if we've got examples where there is that longer delay, I'd really be interested to see them, to have a look at that, because it is obviously we're conscious of making sure our records reflect what the sheriff officer has. And similarly, if a customer still pays to the council, we'll still accept that payment, but we would notify the sheriff officer that we've received that payment and to reduce the balance due. So I would really be interested if there was any particular examples, we would have a look at that, because that interface really should be updated on a weekly basis.
Thanks, Lorna. It was a couple of years ago, and last year I think was the last one I had. And it's just I think it was more to do with Stirling Park rather than our own services. But I'll see if I can find it and get it to you.
Thank you. There was one question from myself, Richard. The suspense account reconciliations, it said it's going to be independently verified. Who's independently doing it?
Thank you, Chair. I think for me this is a matter of fairly good practice that one person looks at reconciliations and the second person, if not every time, casts an eye over them. And it's basically an independent person, normally just someone more senior, who will just cast an eye to make sure they've been done correctly. But as for exactly which officer does it, I've no particular preference. I would leave that to Paul to decide.
My main question was basically how independent's independent. That was the question.
From my perspective, it doesn't need to be someone independent of the finance function. The risk I'm trying to address, if I can go back to that, is that particularly if you get a new member of staff doing it, they can actually do a reconciliation but have not understood how to do it. And actually having a second set of eyes on it can actually help them just make sure they're actually reconciling the right thing. As we have found in the past that the reconciliation is actually reconciling to itself, which is meaningless. So it's just that independent eyes.
Thank you for that. That's basically what I thought. I mean, I'm terrible, and I've been in accounting basically all my days, and I'm a fanatical reconciler, so which is partly probably why I keep asking about that. So anyway, if there are no further questions, can we move on to the recommendations? So we've noted and commented on the internal audit report. Is everyone happy to go ahead with that on that basis? Thank you. So move on to item 6, follow-up of internal audit reports, report by Head of Governance and Assurance. Richard, again, is still here to answer questions. I will open up to member debate. Councillor Dryburgh, I see you figured out how to put your hand up again.
It just takes a bit of time and learning, that's all, Chair. Like, I'm just looking at the four reports, Chair, and they're all recommended for closure based on the actions taken. Claire, I'm pleased that the departments have taken that action, and Richard has found, or this team has found, that the actions are clear and all recommended for closure. I'm happy to go with the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dryburgh. I'm happy to go ahead on that basis as well. Is there anyone else with any further questions? Nope. So we'll move on to the recommendations. So we've noted and briefly commented and we're satisfied that no further reports are required in these subject areas until the next audit cycle. So I'm happy to move on. So we'll move on to item 7, review of council-wide risks, significant service failure and layering of demands, report by Head of Governance and Assurance. Martin Ogilvie and Richard Fox are here to assist if members have any questions. I will open this up to debate. We will need to, again, first of all, agree to receive the presentation. Are we happy to agree that? Yep. So, fire away.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. It's Martin Ogilvie. I'll take you through a couple of presentations that I've kind of joined together. So this really kind of follows on, I suppose, in many respects from Paul Garrett's presentation at 10:30 this morning, and I'll be presenting an outline of 2 further council-wide risks. Now, if councillors have been through the papers, they'll probably notice a lot of similarities between the potential measures and the planned actions. But what I'll do is I'll take members through 6 slides describing the significant service failure first. Then I'll pause. There might be a few questions on that risk, and then I'll take members through a final deck of 6 slides describing the layering of demands. Now, if members have noticed the similarities, I can sort of say that the corporate risk group have debated over the last year and a half, morphing these 2 risks together on a number of occasions. But on balance, we have decided to keep 2 separate risks. The main rationale is that the layering of demands is one where the optimists in the group hope that we'll see a reduction, and this is a sort of temporary risk because of all the external pressures that the world is facing at the minute. And in time, that might be removed. I mean, but we're also quite aware that there will be, as the paper outlines, new threats will undoubtedly continue to emerge, and I think that's the reality of where we've been continually over the last 3 or 4 years. The risk of significant service failure, we hope, can be mitigated but we do know, we have looked and compared to most of the other public sector organisations in Scotland that publish their risk registers, and having a risk like this is pretty common across the corporate structures in the public sector. My final point before I go on to the details, just to say that there are a number of corporate risks, and they are all interconnected to a degree. Particularly in this case, the risk of cybersecurity and information management, but certainly linked back into Paul's risk as well. But all the lead officers meet on a monthly basis, and we do try to, so it's a horrible word, but we do try to deconflict, but certainly coordinate, and we come at it with our own different perspectives. So that there might be some similarity, but we are coming at it from a slightly different angle. So if members are okay, I'll just go through the first few slides on the service failure. So why is this a strategic risk? Well, you know, we have faced unprecedented range of pressures over recent years. There are many different sort of permutations and unique pressures, and you know that's this, I suppose, the reality of where we've been. Now, I was updating the risk in the last 6 weeks before it went to the corporate risk group, and you know, we over the last few years have looked at the risk associated with EU exit. We have removed that risk of no deal. We took that off a few years ago, clearly, but we've also all the initial adjustments that were made to the council's management arrangements, the pivoting to the new transitional management structure that took place in the days after the declaration of the COVID emergency. But also the other risk that we took off from this time last year was the risk associated with disruption around what we thought would happen or what we thought might happen around COP26 in Glasgow. So it's quite dynamic. The new risks that have gone on are associated to avian influenza. We know that Dumfries and Galloway had a number of outbreaks last year, a number of culling operations took place. It's also the ever-changing cyber risk threat. This year, arguably as a result of what's happening in Eastern Europe, and we've got the cost of living crisis. There's the Ukrainian settlement scheme itself, obviously associated to that, and then there is just the care home sector fragility. So this is quite a dynamic risk that every time we formally look at this on a sort of quarterly basis, there will be new risks emerging and hopefully risks being removed. So in terms of possible consequences, clearly the worst one would be loss of lives, but then also damage to property and infrastructure, failure to protect our most vulnerable in the communities, internal investigation, unbudgeted remedial costs that Paul referred to, interruption to daily life, loss of service delivery, loss of reputation, complaints, possible inquiries and investigations. Previous examples, well, just to sort of recap on some of the learning that we have been able to put in place from things that we've dealt with over recent years. We had the emergency closure at the North West Community Campus in 2018 that we learned a huge amount from in terms of incident management. We had the total loss of supply to Allenbank Nursing Home back in 2014. That was quite seminal in terms of working with that sector. We had the Singleton Park care home, the loss of that care home earlier in the year. We had obviously the DG1 situation back in 2014 that some members might remember, learning from how that was managed and handled. We had damage to the IT infrastructure back in 2017. And then for those members that will remember it, during the count last year, we had a temporary loss of power supply. And then every year it seems to be there are various levels of disruption associated to extreme weather events, severe weather events, that we always make a point of debriefing and learning from. And we now have sort of very well practiced procedures for that risk. In terms of control measures, just a couple of slides here on those that inward-facing factors. There are weekly and fortnightly CMT meetings, and there are generically across the council performance management, risk management, scrutiny processes in place across all services, directorates, and corporately, and within specialist areas like large infrastructure projects and procurement. There are clearly all sorts of generic measures in place to make sure that these risks are controlled appropriately. Outward-facing factors. We have a duty under the Civil Contingencies Act to assess community risks. That's published for the west of Scotland by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. All the Category 1 responders formally have to do that. There is, of course, the Corporate Risk Group, which I've mentioned already, of which Paul, myself, Vlad, and a number of other officers are on, where we formally go through this process and we report into CNT and the senior leadership team accordingly. And other external measures we've got, and internal measures, we've got the Information Management Group, the CHOG, sorry about the abbreviation, I do spell it out later on, but that's the Care Home Oversight Group. And for those that aren't aware, the LRP is the Local Resilience Partnership. So again, there is, for instance, on that one, a weekly meeting of a number of officers, including HR and resilience professionals, to go through and look at the impact of any potential industrial action from a civil contingencies perspective, not managing the actual impacts of that wider, but just really on the civil contingencies. So I'll just go through some planned actions. This is the final slide on this first risk. So we have recently been through taking advantage of the learning from Brexit and COVID. We've reviewed the business continuity policy, quite a significant exercise to take place. That's been through all the internal processes and now being sort of rolled out across council services. A renewed focus just to make sure that after the adjustments of COVID, for instance, a lot more staff working from home, that people are still got the appropriate planning in place for severe winter weather. There's crisis management training taking place for the senior leadership team and the corporate management team next week, actually. It's been scheduled for a while, and in that we will be looking at chairing skills, chairing in a crisis, communicating in a crisis, decision-making in a crisis, various modules that are Scottish Government standard sort of training programme for chief officers. And it's been 2 years since we did that exercise, so clearly very timely that we do that. There are sort of separate training programs in place in the new year for those chief officers that take part as strategic leads. In other words, the duty chief officer on a roster system, 52 weeks of the year. We have adopted new corporate, or we will be adopting much improved incident management arrangements. That's going through the corporate system at the minute. And as always, there will always be rehearsals, testing, maintenance of contingency plans for data breaches, cyber attacks, power outages, severe weather, and there's a regular programme of training like that taking place corporately within the trust of partnerships in the west of Scotland, locally and internally. So I'll just pause there, Chair. It might be appropriate, rather than go straight into the second set of slides, although there are similarities, just to pause and look at the risk of significant service failure first, and I'll to take questions, Chair.
Thank you, Martin. Is there anyone, Councillor Drybrough?
Yes, thanks, Martin, for that introduction to risk management in many ways. Obviously, one of the big issues that have happened over the last couple of years was the cyber attack on SEPA, which caused significant business failure in their thing. So I agree with that. Cyber attack is a massive issue, but we are sort of moving a lot of things to the cloud, and I just wonder if there's any sort of problems with that. Obviously, when you're dealing with any IT system, there's always a form of risk. And the other thing is we're well aware that the age profile in Dumfries and Galloway, the demographics is going up rather than coming down. And I'm just wondering what sort of things are being done to try and ensure that we have the ability to look after those vulnerable people who are in that demographic.
In terms of the cyber risk, Councillor, yeah. Yes, okay. Well, in terms of the technical questions around the cyber risk, I understand that moving systems to the cloud is a lot more resilient. It's compartmentalised. It's broken up. There aren't sort of central servers. There is a separate corporate risk. So my colleague Chris Edgar is the lead officer for that risk. So maybe if there's a technical question, we can refer that to him. That's a separate risk that maybe has or will come shortly to this committee for scrutiny anyway. And in terms of support to those that may be more vulnerable to the risk of cyber risk, there are existing projects, because it's a crime, there are existing projects being led by Police Scotland. There are local initiatives that, in terms of doorstep crime associated with it, maybe not cyber, the trading standards and others will support with as well. So again, I'm happy to take a note and go back to my colleagues in the police and maybe update Councillor Driver later with local initiatives or national initiatives that are helping those that are perhaps deemed to be more vulnerable to cyber attack.
If I can come back in, Chair, just again, a lot of the sort of health improvement stuff that's going on is IT related, and obviously that's making sure people can stay in their house longer. With that type of thing, so I think it is important that we understand if there are any risks for that. I know that Lordburn are doing quite a bit of work on this to ensure that their tenants who are of a certain age bracket, maybe have medical conditions and things like that, are looking at how the IT systems can help in their place of residency.
Thank you. I think Vlad has something to say about the cyber security risk.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to echo what Martin said, we do have that other cyber risk within the council-wide risk register, which has been scrutinised and discussed here. But my understanding is that I think the analogy has been given is to not put all your eggs in one basket in regards to cyber, and that allows us to obviously, if our systems are attacked, in essence have more resilience around it, and some systems might still be able to function, unlike the scenario that Councillor Driver alluded to, which was SEPA, in which obviously the whole system went down and everything that went with it. So that particular risk is part of the council-wide risk register. This one's obviously looking at what would happen if there were to be a service failure and how we deal with that.
Thank you, Vlad. There was one thing that crossed my mind reading through the risks here is that, and it is slightly related, but it's coming from a different angle to the one that Councillor Driver was mentioning, to do with the demographics, and I kind of can potentially see a risk from lack of capacity in Dumfries and Galloway through reduced numbers of people wanting to work, and and it's going to affect across the board from the private to the public sector, and perhaps we're going to find that, and we've found it with our capital programme in the last little while, you know, there is a severe risk of just plain not having the capacity to do what we want to do.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree, Chair. Sorry, I don't know if that was a question or just a statement, or whether you were looking for a response.
No, the only response I would like to was just to say, you know that is a recognisable risk. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you started off, you know, we are aware, or as Archie mentioned, we are aware of the demographics. We are aware about, you know, where we will be in sort of like 20 years' time. But just also to reflect, there are huge advantages coming with particularly 5G, and I think that what that offers in terms of support in the home for those that have got additional health needs is huge. I spent yesterday afternoon at the 5G centre up at the Crichton speaking to the business managers up there about how we might manage to utilise 5G in a crisis in coming years, looking sort of 3-5 years ahead. There's absolute vast potential, but we also looked at support in the home, the Internet of Things, the way that healthcare can be provided. So whilst there may be, you know, cyber risk, cyber crime, there will always be, hopefully, an outweighed benefit to society with what's coming down the line, particularly with the remote and rural nature. If we can get the infrastructure in place, we can deliver a 5G framework. I think we'll be in a really strong position moving forward. So that would be my sort of counter observation to the risk side of life. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. Do you want to move on to the next part of your presentation?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll just get the second slides up. So the layering of demands is related, but I think, as I maybe tried to introduce at the start, is something which we certainly hope will be more temporary than significant service failure. Significant service failure tends to be a kind of pretty stable risk on all corporate risk registers. The layering of demands is one which, if I can get my slides to work. I was reflecting on recently. I was listening to the radio a few weeks ago, and it turned out that I think the BBC were covering the story that the Oxford English Dictionary had now added the phrase permacrisis to their lexicon of words that they use, a word that describes an extended period of instability and insecurity, especially one resulting from a series of catastrophic events. So, I think that's probably why we've now got this risk in. We wouldn't have had this risk, the layering of demand, sort of pre-Brexit. I don't believe. It's probably one of sort of corporate bandwidth in terms of the ability to manage that many concurrent crises that seem to be just the normal state of affairs. Again, it's just to sort of say that, where are we now? Well, we've got seasonal influenza, we've got avian influenza, we've got the risk of supplier and service provider failure, cyber risk, fiscal volatility, cost of living crisis, increased operating costs, potential industrial action, the care home sector fragility, Ukrainian resettlement, extreme weather, and COVID resurgence. So we're not short of potential risks to keep managers focused. And therefore, it can be quite a challenge in terms of mitigating these and minimising these risks. But there are things that we can do, and I'll allude to this in the next couple of slides, to reduce the impact of any of these risks materialising, but also the likelihood of them happening. Again, just as a bit there, failure could impact the ability to progress on with council priorities. So possible consequences: failure to make effective and timely decisions, partnerships failing to deliver their delivery milestones, investigation, unbudgeted remedial work, interruption to daily life, loss of reputation again, and investigation inquiries. There are a number of corporate controls. Some of these were similar to previously. We've got the weekly senior leadership team and the fortnightly corporate management team arrangements. There are a whole plethora of regular service and team meetings which will be looking at risk. There's project and programme risk assessments. I've got a programme of appropriate delegations with, if needed, strong responsive chairing and robust programme management arrangements. Again, some of the examples, I won't go through them all again because they were similar to those on the previous risk. In terms of partnership factors, we obviously have a range of regional, South West Scotland, Dumfries and Galloway, and national partnerships where we, in some cases, are required by law to cooperate and coordinate and deliver joint arrangements. These are pretty well tested, complex and concurrent risks. There is, again, a good programme of due diligence arrangements. So for instance, the one I alluded to earlier, the CHOG, the Care Home Oversight Group, which diligently picked up on the risk associated with Singleton Park and will be monitoring other care home risks. We have partnership arrangements that allow for open and frank conversation between the partners, and we have that strong working relationship that can build and maintain sound situational awareness. So for instance, the weekly meetings we have on industrial action would be an example there. In terms of planned actions, we will continue to build on these existing corporate arrangements. Services Council, in many cases, lead or help lead with partnership arrangements to review the continual look at the operating environment. There's training, upskilling, the one I alluded to earlier. There are a framework of management teams that allow for that open and frank discussion as well, so that red flags can be raised as potential scenarios emerge. But if that's too late, there are now pretty robust business continuity policies and arrangements being rolled out to identify the most critical and essential services and to make sure that they have absolutely appropriately tried and tested contingency plans. And that's building on all the huge amount of work that's taken place over the last 10 years, but particularly the last 3 with Brexit and COVID. Some other planned actions, the adoption of new incident management arrangements, and probably associated to that, I hope, will be really robust training for a cadre of trained incident managers who will take the lead or could be asked on to take the lead. Most council services are now going through a quite deep dive review of their business impact analysis, and that's again to take into account the almost completely different landscape that we're operating in now than pre-COVID. COVID has taught us a huge amount in terms of our corporate agility to be able to respond, and we now need to take that into account when we're reviewing all the business impact analysis council services. And again, just reviewing existing arrangements, the GRIP, again, sorry, another acronym there, that's the Graduated Readiness Implementation Plans that all services have been maintaining now for about 12 years in advance of severe weather. So they look at a range of extreme weather events, and as they progress up through the yellow, amber and red warning systems that the Met Office and SEPA issue, and all services need to maintain appropriate plans to deliver essential services throughout these particular scenarios. And again, other measures including these rehearsal exercises that again I alluded to. So Chair, you will notice that there are similarities between the risks. The risks are subtly different though. Some are really just internal and will be there for the long term, and some are part of that sort of permanent crisis that we tend to see ourselves in now, with the a range of new threats and risks emerging all the time, which, as I say, the optimists hope will finally decrease, and that risk in time hopefully can be removed. So again, happy to take questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Is there anybody with any questions? Councillor Hagman.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, I mean, it's quite sobering stuff, and I appreciate, there's a lot of work that goes in and such like. I think one of the sort of points I wanted to raise, and it's not one that's been sort of flagged, is staffing, and the fact that all these mitigations, all these pressures, all these potential disaster outcomes are being managed by staff. And are we looking after our staff so that our staff are resilient, so we can, and I think it's more comments, because I am so conscious that, our staff go above and beyond. We hit these bumps along the road and we do our best to avoid them, but at times we can't. So I think it's really important that in terms of our resilience, in terms of our risk, we really focus in and look after our people, our staff, because frankly, without the likes of yourself and your teams, we wouldn't be anywhere. We would be just lurching from one disaster to the other. So I guess it is more just a comment, because I don't know how you capture that, but I do think looking after our staff is absolutely crucial before we do anything else, because frankly, if our staff fall over, the whole council will fall over. So how do we ensure that we have really good resilience? And I think, we need to capture that somewhere. And I guess this is across all the risks in the council. So I just wanted to maybe put that out there. Thank you. And also to thank you and your teams for keeping us from falling over sideways. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just come back briefly on that. I know that maybe wasn't a question, but just to come back in, I think staff fatigue has been recognised by the corporate management team and the senior leadership team. There are a number of support systems in place via our colleagues in HR to support managers, who in turn can support their staff with a programme of timely interventions, whether that's through OC Health. We have to do a continual programme of personal development. Many of us have to continue to do our continuous professional development as well. There are a number of ways that we can both support staff, but also ensure that staff are upskilled appropriately, and there's job enrichment. And whilst it is challenging and staff are fatigued, we're no different in this council than probably most other public sector services and most other private sectors as well after the last few years. So there's a huge amount of effort goes into trying to maintain morale, train staff, keep staff at work and highly motivated. So just wanted to sort of put that on the record. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Dryborough.
Yeah, thanks for that, Martin. And it's coming back to something that was mentioned earlier on in the meeting about some of the opportunities that we have as councils over a period like income generation and all that. You will hear some people say, Martin, I'm sure, that councils are risk averse rather than risk aware. And I'm just wondering what your response to that is, because I do see that there are opportunities in the future coming along for us. There might be some risk, there's some risk in everything that we do as a council. But when you hear things like councils are risk averse rather than risk aware, what do you say to that?
Well, we've had that motto the other way around, Councillor Dryborough, for a number of years. So we've been using that. We've been trying to say to people that we're not risk averse. We are risk aware, and it's about balanced decision making. And I can see Vlad nodding, and Vlad will probably have a more strategic perspective as me as a member of both the SLT and the CMT in terms of what the corporate's trying to do to be as innovative as possible to increase income generation and to look beyond just delivering services in the method they've been delivered for many years, and to try to look to expand. And just to give one analogy, I know that within my particular service, we've got housing and licensing standards. We generate a lot of income, and we are continually looking to optimise that. We will, and it's part of my team plan, it's part of Vlad's service plan, to continue to look for opportunities to maximise income, to innovate, and therefore to absolutely not be risk averse, but to take the opportunities, and even to be bold enough to allow ourselves to make the odd mistake at time, but to do that in a structure that then we can learn from, as long as we don't make the same mistake twice. But we can take a risk and try something. I know that in my service I've tried that a few times and had to eat a lump of humble pie and reverse back. But at least we have a culture in the council where managers can try new projects and new ideas in a way that we know that that's a safe place to try something. So I don't know whether put Vlad on the spot, I don't know whether Vlad wants to come in from a more kind of corporate perspective, because I was only able to give a service example.
I'll look forward to visiting that in January.
Vlad, do you want to add anything?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Martin. Yes, more than happy to come in on that point. I think absolutely, as risk sits within governance and assurance, as well as legal perspectives on that. One thing that I've always said is that we need to be enabling as a support service. We need to enable us to make the right decisions, and that allows us to manage the risks within that. That doesn't mean that simply because there's a risk we don't do it. It means that we manage that risk, and it's important that we have that, because absolutely when things go wrong, at times we can pull back from it, but importantly members will scrutinise that and will say, why did that go wrong? Why did you not consider those risks? So it's important that we manage risk and we manage it appropriately, but we're here to enable us to do in essence, move forward in terms of improving the services that we've got, and that allows us to make the right decisions, but only if we are managing those risks. So in terms of this particular one, the layering of demands, yes, that's a continuous issue for local government in particular, but public sector in general, as there are more and more demands on the overall council and services that we hold through legislation, through changes in circumstances that are factors and environments outside of our control. The important thing for us is, I think, again, to prioritise. And to prioritise with that decision-making process that we've discussed already, to risk assess it, that business continuity, what are the most important critical services we must deliver, and they must be prioritised above all, and then thereafter, obviously, we may get into the other risk that we've just encountered, which is service failure for others that might not be deemed to be a priority. So that's how we would manage it, and we have been managing it, and the example of COVID gives that example. Certain things had to stop in order to manage that particular situation. We did that well, and we continue that kind of risk management process moving forward.
Thank you, Vlad. If there's no further questions, we'll move on to the recommendations. So we were asked to agree to receive the presentation, which we have. Note the existing measures in place and planned actions to manage the Council's significant service failure risk as detailed in Appendix 1 and consider whether these are sufficient. Note the existing measures in place and planned actions to manage the Council's layering of demands risk as detailed in Appendix 2 and consider whether these are sufficient. And 4. Consider the implications of significant service failure and layering of demand risk on Council activities. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 8, which is the annual government statement 22-23, and it's the findings of the good governance questionnaire. Report by Head of Governance and Assurance. Vlad Valenti, Jackie Holland and Fraser Davis are here to assist members if they have any questions. I will open the meeting up to debate. Are there any questions on the governance report or survey? No, it doesn't look like it. The question I kind of potentially would, I've asked a couple of times is because the governance statement's very much a developing process, and it's not so much maybe about the result of this. It's how is this going to help you to develop it further going forward?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll come in on that, and I think that's a really valid question, because what you don't want is just simply a bureaucratic process to get us to an annual governance statement at the end of it that actually does not help us as managers, doesn't help us as an organisation. So what we have been working on, certainly in the last couple of years, has been to try and improve that so that it's more reflective process to allow managers to, in essence, ask the right questions for them. They then have that overall scrutiny of their whole service through that process that allows us more corporately to see how the bigger picture is, but it also allows us to support the relevant heads of services within those particular questions that we're asking. So some of the questions that we're asking is about, is there any lessons learned? Is there any training that you might require in specific areas that you're going to deliver, etc. So it's about the ongoing improvement, not only within the overall statement, as you say, but actually as an organisation, and how we can help the relevant services do that.
Thank you, Vlad. I don't see anyone else wanting to come in, so we'll just move to the recommendations. We have considered the findings in the good governance questionnaire from 3.9 to 3.39, no demonstrated level of compliance with the principles contained in the Council's current local code of corporate governance. So thank you very much. So we move along to item number 9, which was the scrutiny review on support to elected members. Update report by Head of Governance and Assurance. Nick Evans, Fraser Davis and Anna Sweeten are here to assist members if they have any questions. Open up to debate on this matter. Councillor Hagman, would you like to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Oh, I see I've got Councillor Lowe coming in as well, so it's not just the Hagman and Dryburgh show this morning. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this one. I think it's really important that we do check in on this, and I appreciate that there's some of these are ongoing. And certainly when I look in the appendix, one of the ones that jumped out to me was the monthly EMES status on recommendation 3.1 on page 67. I'm just wondering, why are we having a trial for this? We used to have this, and then there was a request for it to be reinstated, but we now appear to be going to a trial rather than just rolling it out. I'm not quite sure what the rationale behind that is. And in certain, and sort of jumping back a little bit in recommendation 2.1, document templates to be provided in a central location. Whereabouts is this? Because I've certainly never come across that, and perhaps it was in the members' induction and one of the ones that I missed. But is there information that can be shared? And it jumps on another point, and I've raised it through the Business Bureau as well. We as elected members have access to the corporate. The corporate, I'm trying to think of the correct wording on this, but all the consultations that come in, and it's a Teams channel. And certainly when I raised it within my own political grouping, there was quite a few members who didn't even know of the existence of that Teams channel. When I raised it in the Business Bureau, none of the other business bureaus actually were even aware of this Teams channel. So where we are creating templates and hubs, how are we ensuring that members actually know they exist and how to access them? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hagman. It's you're basically singing off the same song sheet as me. I was looking through this thing and I'm thinking a lot of the stuff with it, and I did put it down to the fact that I maybe didn't get to all the induction meetings or whatever. So, Anne, would you want to come in?
Thank you. Yes, thanks, Chair. Just to confirm the templates, I've only been involved in the template side, but certainly they are in place. I haven't sent out anything to elected members to say so, so my apologies if we felt we should have did that. I was hoping that would happen through the Business Bureau in terms of letting them be aware that those were in place, but I'm happy to send out an email to let members have the link to the team site where all the templates are that I've created for the administration support, if you like.
Yeah. If I can come back, if it's confirmed it's on a Teams site, I think possibly we need to maybe have a bit of a training session on Teams, because it is a new way of working, and certainly I'm slowly getting used to it. But was there a specific how to use Teams as part of the induction? I don't think there was, and I think it would be maybe really useful, even if it's just an hour session with members, so members actually know how to access these things. Thanks.
I'm certainly happy that that should be the case. I'm not sure what Vlad thinks about in terms of who should conduct that training or how we deliver that.
Vlad, do you want to come in on that? Because I must admit, I think that's a very good point that Councillor Hardman's making here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's fine. We'll take that away as officers. It doesn't matter who does it. We'll do it, and that's an action for us to take forward. I think alongside that, to address the earlier question, is I know that there is I'm not sure if Nix is on the call, but there is a library where quite a lot of these documents are held for access for members. But I think part of that discussion that has just been had for us to take an action in terms of maybe going through the various resources that are available for members and how to access those. I think that's important. So that could either be done as another seminar, or we could potentially record it as officers and then make it available to all, so that members can then follow it in their own time, which we know that we've found difficulties with scheduling, as we know. So there's ways around it. We'll take that forward as an action. But Nick, I don't know if you wish to come in through the chair in terms of the document library and also where all the induction seminars are held.
Nick, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sure, certainly. In terms of the document library Vlad's referring to there, on Connect via the intranet, when you go through to the member pages, you'll see there's a, the display will depend on whether you're simply on your laptop or perhaps you've got two screens. If you're on your laptop, if you scroll to the bottom of the pages, there's a menu there, and one of the tabs you can choose is library, and in the library you'll find all the constitutional documents, so the term schemes of delegation, members' remuneration and expenses information, the code of conduct, all as I say, a number of different constitutional documents. In terms of the other resources available, all the induction sessions and the documentation that went along with those, they're on. There's a member tile on the front pages of the intranet page. If you click on political governance, you'll then see training for members. Might not have the phraseology right, member training it may be, but you'll get the gist. And if you click on that, it's got a link to all the sessions that were held, the main induction sessions that were held after the elections, and you can enjoy those at your leisure or relive them again if you so choose. But certainly we can put a session on as regards teams for anyone who wants a refresher or some other tips on how to use it. No problem with putting that on at all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. That'd be quite helpful. But equally, I'm just thinking whether we're going through the instructions of how we access this thing, all this stuff. You should perhaps put something out, even if it is just a round robin email with some, pointing out the facilities and the resources that are actually available to elected members, because a lot of people are completely unaware of it and probably would find it quite difficult to access it, if I'm being honest. And there was Councillor Hartigan also asked a question earlier about the stats for EMES and why it was a trial and not just being rolled out, and I didn't hear an answer to that at all. Could someone just confirm why that is?
I'm not sure if I could come in.
Sure, thank you.
Fraser's wanting to come in, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not entirely sure of the specific reason it's having to be trialled, but I believe there are changes being made to the report, so I think it is just to take into account of those changes, and it reflects everything that members need. But I'm happy to go back and check with the relevant officers and get that to you.
Thank you very much, Fraser, and thanks for your patience, Councillor Lowe, if you want to come in now.
Thank you. Yes, page 68, item 4.2, the council to investigate the use of Zoom and other platforms. Now, when we were first elected, Zoom was not available, and it now is as complete. I can't remember receiving any communication to say that Zoom is now available. And again, it may be the same thing to do with teams that people have never used Zoom. So will there be training for those as to how to get onto Zoom and how to use it? But it's really great to have it, but I'd have been using it now if I'd have known it was available, but I can't remember being told.
Thanks for that. Nick, have you anything to add to that?
I can come. I can come back on that, Chair. Zoom is an unusual one in as much as it's available for members. Now you have the facility to download apps from the App Store on your devices, either your telephone, laptop, tablet, iPad, whereas officers don't. Now, the reason being for that is that members' devices are hosted in a slightly different way to how officers are, so there's not the same level of threat to the council network via members' devices, if that helps at all. So officers don't currently have access to Zoom, but members do. You simply have to download it from the App Store. As for tips and training on Zoom, I certainly couldn't provide them at this point because I've not used it myself, but we can certainly look into that and provide something for members. Again, it was a response to a number of requests from members. I think primarily around meetings with outside organisations such as community councils, which tended to use Zoom rather than Teams, essentially because Zoom was available free of charge, whereas Teams comes along as part of a Microsoft package.
Thanks for that, Nick. But I think the point is valid that it would have been helpful if members had been made aware that that was available to them, because it did come as a surprise to me reading this report. Are you happy with that, Councillor Lowe? Yeah. Oh, I gave a thumbs up. That's fine. Councillor Hagman, is that a new hand or a legacy hand?
It's a new hand. I just wanted to come in on the back of Councillor Lowe's point. I've not looked on my laptop when I've been in English Street, but up until a month or so ago, Zoom wasn't available on my laptop. It is now available on my laptop, which is, you don't need to even download it off the App Store. So that has actually fundamentally changed. I maybe shouldn't be saying these things out loud because I've been one that's been lobbying to get this. So again, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for putting it on. But actually, you know, the point was raised that council officers sometimes need to be able to access Zoom to come along to community council meetings. It would appear that we now have access across all our devices, not just on the iPad. So I think just that good communication out. But I just wanted to say thank you for finally giving us access to that. Thank you.
From what I understand, it was elected members' access only. Is that correct, Nick?
That was certainly my understanding, Chair, and thanks to Councillor Hagman for that feedback, because I was certainly unaware that it's being pushed out to members on their laptops. The conversations I'd had with BTS were around, yeah, members have access to the App Store, they can download it there, but yeah, that's useful if it's being pushed out. And certainly for officers, I think the route round it has been that where officers have needed to access Zoom, there are some devices floating around that aren't connected to the network, so they can be used to access meetings via Zoom, or some officers, I think, have used their own personal devices to access a particular meeting. But I'm not aware at this point whether it's planned or not that officers will have access to Zoom on their sort of day-to-day devices, if you like. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. The kind of slight ironic thing about this is we've got access to Zoom now, but more of the meetings are now being in person. So it's welcome, but it's maybe slightly late to be a great benefit. So if there's no further questions, we'll move on to the recommendations. So we're asked to consider the progress made in implementing the recommendations arising from the scrutiny review and support to elected members as impact set out in paragraphs 3.7 to 3.9, detailed in the appendix. I think we have considered it, and I think the one message that's coming across loud and clear is we need a wee bit more communication, ideally. So thank you for that. So now we move on to item 10, which is the report of shortlisted topics for consideration of inclusion in the Scrutiny Review Programme for 2023. Again, by Head of Governance and Assurance. Vlad Valenti and Fraser Davies are here to assist members if they have any questions. Basically, what we're being asked to do is to agree up to 2 scrutiny reviews. There are, I think it's 4 or 5 suggested. Let's want to open up to any questions. Councillor Dryborough.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I'm having a look at the ones in 3.4. I think when you look at the third bullet point about the care crisis of 3,005, that's been asked in many other places around, you know, the council, and there's also some coming full council on Thursday. The planning management strategic, that's been addressed elsewhere. and education is part of the education and committee side of things. I do think there is a need to look at the school transport and the risk to children. And the reason for that is when I was doing my summer tour, there was an issue about using taxis, one taxi per child per additional need side of things, and there was some good work going across in the West with the staff across there, and I think we need to look at that and see how we can improve that situation, considering the cost of that is sometimes £1,000 a week. So I think we need to look at that particular thing. I think also the additional needs for within education and how we're delivering supporting children with dyslexia. And if there's any feedback suggests to widen the scope of this potential, if you include all additional support, I think that's really important. We need to do that. So those are the two I would suggest, Chair, that we go forward, because I believe that the others are being looked at elsewhere within the council. But I think that certainly the school transport one for me is pretty important to look at that and see how we can try and improve that situation.
School transport is a big issue in so many of the rural areas. Councillor Hagman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I don't know how this works. So we, as a political grouping, had a look at these, and we came up with our own list. Now, obviously, there's 4 political groupings, all of which have representation here, and we're only being asked to choose 2. I appreciate that, staffing resource. We can't say, well, each group pick one and go forward. Actually, although as Councillor Dryber has said, the issue of planning has been taken forward elsewhere. Certainly from the SNP political grouping's point of view, we felt that actually still having an internal audit over this as being really important. So certainly that was one of our requests, to take that one forward, the planning management, and certainly getting the feedback from service users and professionals, so we could hear directly from those using the service and actually capture some of that information. In terms of the second one, looking to go forward, maybe my colleagues will just maybe keep me correct here. It was on looking at that additional needs, and like Councillor Dryber, we were very keen that this is actually, there's reference to the external provider called Scotland, but actually extending it out. And the example was, for example, children who are maybe hard of hearing and getting hearing aids and technology that's required for them, but across all the additional needs, and how are we ensuring that we're actually meeting their needs. So certainly those were the 2, certainly from my political grouping. But maybe if I've not got that correct, because we were sort of swithering between the education and what level of information as well we should be getting. But all of these topics, they're all of interest. It's really hard. I don't know how we choose the 2. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hagman. Vlad, if you want to come in.
Yeah, I think, and I'll let Fraser come in as well in terms of the process, but I certainly understand what you've got there is what's been proposed by all political parties, and yes, our ask as officers is that you identify 2 within this committee for us to carry out the scrutiny exercise. There's a significant amount of work that goes in the background in terms of delivering on that, both from the relevant services that obviously have to input into it, but also from our own service in terms of governance. So just going back to that layering of demands, what I asked officers is what is actually viable and reasonable for us to deliver on that, and what we agreed was that 2 is the optimum level for us to carry out in order to pay the relevant due notice and in essence focus that it needs to have for it to be of particular use for this committee. Otherwise we're paying lip service to lots of different scrutinies. The one just concern I would have in terms of the planning one is obviously certain implementations happening as we speak in terms of that kind of planning, at a strategic front, and is whether we are potentially scrutinising to an early stage when some of the things haven't quite come to fruition yet. And I'm aware that, for example, there's recruitment that's just been agreed through I think it was FPT or Economy and Resources, and therefore these things haven't quite come to fruition yet, so it might be a bit early to be scrutinised how that's progressing when they're still being implemented. So that's the one word of caution I would put on that kind of bigger planning management one.
Fraser, you got anything to add?
No, not much to add, Chair, with regards to what Vlad said. Just to highlight Councillor Hagman's point about kind of how the committee, is deciding this. Is it one per group? Obviously, we're only looking for 2 over the next year, so it might not be a practical solution to just sort of, I suppose, that would lead to sort of 2 groups choosing. So it's try and build a consensus as to what the committee would like to look at, really.
Councillor Brodie.
Thanks, Malcolm. You must have woken me up by using the word schools and education. So it's yeah. I think the school transport, I think that's in the community's budget, and it is a cause for concern. So perhaps we could look at that. And specific learning difficulties and how we deal with them might be another issue. As well as dyslexia, there's ADHD, there's other impairments as well, and autism as well, which is particular interest, because what happens to students with on the autistic spectrum disorder when they leave the school system? How are they picked up then? Because there's a sort of limbo between school and after school. So that'd be one that'd be particularly interesting taking up, is ASD, moving not just at schools but moving into the adult world.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Councillor Beretti.
Sorry for this slowness. It's clicking the buttons, Chair. Just going on what has already been said, I know that Vlad has talked about the planning, which is, as he says, is sort of in an early stage. It might benefit from time to see how that plays out. And from also what's been said about the transport and the additional needs, so that's the first and the second. I think both of those are in somewhat linked, Chair, because I've encountered some youngsters in my ward who actually have additional needs and struggle with transport because of that. So the two are linked. Now, it's not in every case, but they seem to be linked in a number of cases. And I think transport is the one area that throughout this, or in other cases in this Audit Scrutiny Committee, we've seen that it is a potential point where there's a degree of uncertainty as to what is going to happen in the future because of our current crises. Now, I suspect many of us watch the fuel costs going up and down. None of us can predict how that is going to impact in the next 6 months, 12 months. We can hypothesize that things may well get worse. And how is that going to impact on the transport system to schools? Because I know that I've got a number of people who are struggling, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Beretti. I don't see any other hands up, so I'm just going to go through this. I think I'm detecting there is a consensus around the first suggestion, the additional needs within education. Is everybody happy to go ahead with that one? And I think it's important to bear in mind that this is the scrutinies for next year. We can revisit this we'll be going through this process every year. So if we pick 2 this year, then we can clearly pick another 2 the following year. And equally, I think we did get agreement in one of the first meetings of this session, this term, that there was always a bit of flexibility, and if there was anything that cropped up that was a serious issue that we wanted looking at the time, we could potentially have a look at that as well. So, but do we have consensus on the additional needs within education? Yeah, that's looking good. So we'll definitely take that one off. Now, we'll just move on to the school transport and the risk to our children of obtaining school transport and how we obtain best value by using external providers. Like Councillor Hagman, I'm sure in my group, we would potentially have been looking at the planning aspect, as it's been very important to us. But given that there's ongoing work, and if that was taken off the equation, would there be consensus to look at the school transport? Councillor Dryburgh, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, yeah, I'm happy with that. And in the planning one, of course, Lad has actually said that we're looking at this implementation of the action plan for that particular department, and already there's been some discussion on employment of new planning officers and things like that along the way. There's nothing to stop us coming back in 6 months' time and saying, for next year, we want this back and we want to see the improvements that's on that action plan and come back again in a year's time. But it's just about giving them the time to move through that process. We know how difficult it is to get applications, and never mind applications for employment, not applications for planning, by the way, for public sector organisations such as ourselves in the NHS. So that's the reason why I chose the other 2 chairs, because the other points within that particular paragraph at 3.4 are being addressed to some degree, one way or another, in other forums. But there's nothing, as you say, there's nothing to stop us coming back in a year's time and saying, right, we want them 2 now for this particular year.
Thank you, Councillor Dryburgh. That was very much my thoughts as well. There's no point in us setting up a review on something that's being looked at the moment, and perhaps with the changes in planning take effect, it would be worth having a look at the effectiveness of that. So that is basically leaving us with the school transport aspect of it. So again, do we have agreement to go with that on that basis? I think that's looking like we've got agreement for that. So that will be the 2 items going forward, if that's okay. Thank you. So we're asked to agree for 2 scrutiny reviews. We've made our suggestion and chosen those 2, so that's fine. So now we just need to move on to item 11. Any other business deemed urgent by the chair due to the need for a decision. I have no urgent business, so I would like to thank you all for your attendance and contributions, and close the meeting. Thank you.